Welcome to the Typical Sportsman Podcast. I've got one that you absolutely have to stay tuned in for. I've got Miss Sonja Christensen from the University of Michigan State. She is an assistant professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. She is also part of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and National Fish and Wildlife Health Coordinator. And she is here to answer some of the big questions about CWD. How can us as hunters make a big difference? And kind of understanding the garbage information that is going around about CWD. We've also got Mr. Justin Spring, Executive Director of Pope & Young. And we take a deep dive into the truths about CWD. It's incredibly informative, and hopefully it'll help you weed through some of the false information that you have heard about CWD. Guys, this episode is brought to you by my good friends over at ScentLock. I absolutely love deer hunting. It's what I grew up cutting my teeth on. And when it comes to CWD, I think it's important to note that nobody loves the deer herd more than the deer hunters. And so I love deer. I love deer hunting, but I also just absolutely love the species. And so it benefits me to understand the truth about CWD. So I would highly encourage you to stay tuned in right here, and it is going to help you become a more informed hunter. It's going to help you better communicate some of these issues when you do hear false information going around, and it's going to help us understand what we can do to truly make a difference. Let's jump in with Miss Sonja and Justin and talk about CWD.
For the true sportsman, it's more than a pastime. It's a way of life. Embrace the lifestyle of hunting, fishing, and the thrill of the wild. Live the life. Be typical.
I am proud to announce a new partnership with the incredible guys over at Mod Archery. I got my hands on a mod saw a couple years ago, and I was absolutely blown away. It's incredibly light. It's incredibly powerful. It is hands down the best saw that I've ever used. That being said, when the opportunity came up to work with these guys, I was jumping all over it because I only work with people that I truly believe in. Let me tell you something. I truly believe in this saw. If your arrows aren't dialed, absolutely nothing else matters. And Mod Archery gives you the tools to build better arrows and make every single shot count. Mod Archery is designing and building innovative gear for the modern archer. Now, I'm an arrow junkie. I love building arrows. However, here's what I'll tell you. My last arrow saw that I had, buddy, you had to take that out in the garage, and you couldn't do it when the kids were asleep because it would shake the whole house, and it sounded absolutely ridiculously loud. I was blown away the first time I hit the switch on the mod saw. It didn't shake the table, and it was whisper quiet. I honestly thought there was no ways it was going to cut through my arrows. Thought there's no way this thing is going to cut my arrows good. But I was wrong. That thing is a powerhouse. It's built to work, and it builds really good arrows. Why? Because they have innovatively added you an arrow spinner on the saw, an arrow square on the saw, so you can do it all in one place. If you're not building your own arrows, what are you waiting for? I can't believe the guys who spend the money to go and have a shop cut and fletch their arrows. Because really, if you spend that money twice, you've paid for the saw and you can do it all on your own and spend the time to build better arrows. Guys, you absolutely have to check out Mod Archery and their incredible mod saw. It is an absolute game changer, and I am a firm believer in it. All right, we are going to start. Miss Sonja Christensen, why don't you give us an introduction to yourself and your current role there at Michigan State?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I am an assistant professor here in the Fisheries and Wildlife Department at Michigan State University. So that's in the College of Ag and Natural Resources. And here I get to be the person working with graduate students, postdocs, undergrads. I teach 2 classes. We do a lot of research. I'm also have a contract with AFWA, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, as their National Fish and Wildlife Health Coordinator. So I like to keep my connections with AFWA strong and making sure that we're building capacity and technical support for all things wildlife health.
And what is your current involvement with CWD?
Yeah, so my background is really wildlife biology and disease ecology. Before I went into academia, I was a deer biologist working for a state agency. Then I decided to go work on the research end of that and do my PhD actually here at Michigan State. But I love to focus on cervid diseases in particular. So CWD, EHD, all the things that deer, elk, moose, all those critters get.
Very cool. And so just so everybody knows, this is one of our conservation spotlight episodes for Pope and Young. So I have my redneck nerd on, Justin Spring, executive director of Pope and Young. Sonja, redneck nerd was a term that we coined. When I hear these people talk, I'm like, man, you're so educated on this. And, sometimes hunters get that bad rap for just being like, well, we just like to go out and kill stuff. And then you hear from these folks who can really talk at a really high level on why we do the things we do, on the importance of wildlife conservation, on, really high level herd management and all this stuff. And it really made me realize that knowledge is deadly. And that's why Pope and Young came out with this awesome shirt, Redneck Nerd, knowledge is deadly.
I love it.
So Justin, kind of share with me your heart behind this from a Pope and Young standpoint, as far as sharing the light on CWD, if you will.
Okay. I mean, the big thing here is, everybody's been online and there's a lot of stuff going around in the history of CWD. I've been involved with this my whole career. I went to school in Wisconsin when it was first coming there, all that. Boone and Crockett, I spent a lot of time there. Originally, when CWD hit the landscape, we saw that the issue was going to be, the facts surrounding it. What's rumor, what's real, what's not. That was 20 years ago. We're still having the conversation. Worked with Sonja over the years, very knowledgeable on this. So it'd be a great opportunity to sit down, make sure nothing's happened that I've missed, and then, kind of get your perspective on it as well, Dylan, of, from the typical sportsman, what are the questions you guys want to ask?
From the dumb redneck is what you just said. Gotcha.
No, I said from the typical sportsman.
You said it nicely, which I appreciate. So Sonja, I guess before we really get into this, share on a basic level, but maybe even a higher level as well. Really, what is CWD? I mean, what causes it? Why is it spreading? What can we do? I mean, just kind of give that umbrella talk of CWD.
Yeah. So chronic wasting disease is a prion-based disease that cervids can get. So it's chronic wasting and disease, right? The actual agent, we call it the pathogen part, right, of the triangle. So we always have in disease ecology, we have the pathogen, maybe it's a virus, maybe it's a bacteria. In this case, neither of those two, it's a prion. And it's an infectious prion that is sort of unraveled and re-raveled again to be in an infectious form. So that's the pathogen part. Then we've got a host, which is, our big game species that we're thinking about here. And then the environment. So where can it be? What kind of factors sort of facilitate it getting around or not? So some diseases have a vector, some aren't. But again, this is a prion-based disease. So chronic means that, it can keep occurring within an animal, and wasting, that's referring to actually the brain tissue. Typically in a deer is one of the things that we see really becoming sort of spongy. We see sort of vacuoles, like holes in the brain. And that infectious prion, which is a protein, is doing that action. So eventually that animal is sort of wasting away. It's not thinking, it's not using its brain. It's not going and eating like it should. It's not avoiding predators and hunters and cars like it should. It's not doing well. It's really starting to just have a pretty miserable life. And then disease, that, that actual impact on the animal. Now, chronic wasting disease is related to a few other prion diseases. A lot of people think about scrapie, which is another prion-based disease. Those are all transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, which is a big word, which that just means that it's something that's directly infectious. It's transmissible directly between animals through saliva, other things like that. Spongiform, think spongy holes in your brain, right? Like it's really affecting that brain tissue and the neurology and that neurosystem and encephalopathy. So that's the disease part, really. And scrapie, mad cow disease, Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease in humans, those are all other prion diseases.
Gotcha. So what is the, and maybe this is a much bigger question than we have. Well, I'll just ask it. So for the listener, what are there certain states that are way worse off as far as CWD goes currently? Are there states that haven't seen it yet? I mean, what are the states that are, not been affected as highly yet? Just so the listener can kind of wrap their mind around, oh man, I live in that state. Didn't even know it was that big of a deal.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. So CWD is like a slow burn, which really makes it challenging. And because it's a prion, and all that, those big words I just mentioned earlier, right? That just means that it is fatal and it stays in the soil, and it's just kind of, once you have it, you have it. It's really hard to get rid of. So with that in mind, the places that have had it the longest have also tend to have it the most, right? Because that slow burn just kind of builds and grows, right? And so places like Colorado, Wyoming, et cetera, have had it the longest, at least in North America, that's been documented. And there's other states like, Wisconsin, Arkansas, others that have probably had it for quite a long time because their prevalence is getting higher and that spatial spread has kind of grown too. So yeah, sometimes you can see, this disease sort of hang out pretty low. Maybe it's detected in a county that you hunt in, but it's not actually at very high prevalence. You don't even really notice it. You don't see sick deer at all for a really long time. But that slow burn kind of keeps building up. So again, once you have it, you just want to keep that prevalence low and try to keep that spread minimized.
What states currently don't, and maybe there's way too many to name, but are there any states that don't have it at all yet?
So when you ask questions like that, I think, yeah, there are, but also we got to be looking for it to say that we found it. So There's always a little bit of a combo of that, right? Like, do we know it's not there? Not 100%. You know, scientist hat says I can't quite say that, but there are states that haven't detected it at least. So, and they're kind of scattered around different places. I think we're well up in the 30s, 36, 37 states that have detected it.
Okay.
So on that, my understanding is a test for CWD, they take a sample and they're actually looking for that folded protein. So there's not truly a positive or a negative. It's a not detected. Is that still correct? Is you could have a deer that could have that protein, and if it's not in that sample, you could have a not detected, but that deer actually does carry CWD. Is that correct?
So, yeah, there's sort of two things there. There's the surveillance part of looking for it and finding the needle in the haystack, the diseased animal, and lots of free-ranging animals roaming around. And then in that individual animal, actually having enough prion and enough infection for whatever diagnostic test to pick up on it. So, yeah, those are kind of two pieces of the puzzle that we're battling with all the time. There's sort of two big diagnostic tests out there. The immunohistochemistry, or IHC, and then an ELISA test. So you might hear of those. They're both good tests. They're both quite reliable. There's also some newer tests or diagnostic approaches that are being done that can sometimes pick up on prions at a different level, but trying to make sense of that information sometimes relative to management is difficult, and we're still trying to work out in some places, all right, well, what does this mean if there's just a tiny, tiny little bit of prion that's infectious maybe in a sample that's positive, and then it shows up negative in another sample. So these are the type of tough things that, managers have to deal with. So the science is improving, And one of the biggest things we need with CWD, it is slow moving, but we need time. We need to be able to develop that science and have some consistent support and funding out, honestly, for being able to look at these herds long term, really keep a close eye on them, and make sure that we are seeing those impacts and assessing them and improving and thinking of new ways to counteract this really nasty disease.
And so you mentioned Colorado and Wyoming. That was the original detection, correct? Was when it was first identified in the U.S. was Colorado? Or where did they first identify CWD?
Yes, correct. Yep. Not too far away from Fort Collins. Yep.
And so those herds have had it the longest. What's the timeline there? And I know there's been some studies, but you kind of summarize what we've seen the first place we identified it and what the overall effects on those corresponding elk and mule deer was.
Yeah, so it was really described and identified in the late 60s, early 70s by Dr. Beth Williams and others. And so we've known about it for a while. It's really hard to know how long it's been there, right? And there's a few different ideas of how it originated. So, there might be some relationship to scrapie because there was some association with some scrapie infected sheep herds in the area. But, based on what we're seeing in other parts of the world, it also might just be this type of prion and the PRNP, genes having some ability to morph in a way and come about, or emerge. So that's a part where, I think that there's some real expertise on that I would want to lean on, but because I wasn't there at the time, and looking at those diagnostics is really helpful. But then as that disease emerged and more folks were looking around and finding it more, the management was a bit different too. So again, those state agencies, Wyoming and Colorado, they're just trying to figure out what to do. And now many years later, those populations look a little bit different, I'll say. So it's geographically fairly spread out in Wyoming. It's not, border to border in Colorado necessarily, but it certainly is where we see some of the highest prevalence. We also know, though, that for example, where that prevalence has remained low in places like Colorado, for example, the age structure of some of the mule deer populations and such has still been a little bit more what we'd expect to see compared to a much lower or younger age structure in really severely infected herds. So after a while, again, CWD is a sort of slow burn. It just sort of insidious. It's going to slow down your population growth. It's going to slow down survival, and for males and females, but often we see it in a slightly higher prevalence for male deer, mule deer, whitetails, etc., and elk. But those, as older deer start to sort of die earlier, your age structure in your population gets younger and younger. And so that's been documented in a couple places in Colorado in particular.
So, Justin, I know this kind of all stemmed from a conversation at ATA where you were talking with, it was the bow hunter die guys about the current management practices for CWD. So, Sonja, kind of run us down. What are the current management practices for CWD? And then Justin, you can kind of dissect what you were talking about there about your kind of issues with it or the dangers of it, if you will.
Yeah. So management can mean a lot of things for state wildlife agencies trying to get a handle on this. And sometimes that can mean regulations around preventing disease from getting in or keeping risk low. So it's more of a prevention management. But then there's also, once it's there, what do you do? So let's say once it's in, what do you do? Now, it's been said early on throughout this disease from a lot of the best scientists who knew it really well, because it's a prion and because it can stay infectious in the soil and the environment, you got to cut deep and you got to cut wide. You've really got to try to get in early, take those infectious animals out, clean up that landscape, and hopefully it doesn't pop up again. Now, that's a hard pill to swallow for hunters. I'm a hunter, like you guys know, right? Like you don't want to have that, the government come in and affect your herd that you've been watching for a long time. So the medicine is not great to take on that front, right? What we can work on is harvest, making sure those deer densities and such are at levels where they're not really high density, where we're not bringing animals together and having a lot of direct contact, if at all possible. Sometimes it means a harder hunt, but it also means a healthier herd, hopefully in the long run. So again, it's often management through harvest. And then, you also have targeted removal. That's absolutely important sometimes. I'd say I'd much rather have a targeted removal in a population where it got cleaned up ideally, and then hopefully that we're good. And, deer and elk and all those, they'll come back if they're not food limited and they've got good habitat and people aren't putting too much pressure on them. So that, again, is a tough one, but it can work. Now, again, we need doing that at a broad scale and with a lot of support from leadership, hunters, landowners, and everybody. That's where that really is difficult, though. It's like people just aren't going to want to do that for a really long time. And especially when you look at all these healthy looking animals, they look fine. They don't look diseased because CWD takes up to 2 years sometimes to even look clinical and it really, really bad in an animal or for an animal to die from it. So if, you're in your tree stand and everything walking by you looks awesome and you've got all these very restrictive regulations on, what you're supposed to be able to hunt, it certainly can be very frustrating for hunters specifically.
So is this major herd reduction to reduce the spread of CWD, is that a good long-term solution? I mean, I know looking at it right now, it's like, well, this is kind of what we have to do, but long-term, is that sustainable and is it a good long-term solution?
I really hope that it buys us some time in some places and we don't have to use a chainsaw to it. I mean, if we have some good surveillance going on, we can say, okay, let's target this area that's pretty risky, but these other populations, there's, no reason to think there's CWD there, should be fine. Let's make sure those animals are healthy and resilient and, we're managing them in the right level for all sorts of other reasons why, deer and elk are managed at certain population levels. So I think using more of a surgical approach when possible is one way we can get there. Trying to get a little more time so we can get more science and more options out there for free ranging herds is great. But again, there is going to be potentially just some low level prevalence in your population. And if we can keep it low, you can kind of, won't be potentially too bad. It's just when those prevalence levels and CWD gets really high, when biologists like myself get really worried and about the future, just because you just can't really go back from that. And as much as I'd like to say that there was another silver bullet right now, there's just not a lot of other options. So keeping it low, keeping it out is our best shot right now.
So, and this is where I want to ask the basic question as far as just from a hunter standpoint who has no knowledge of the science-backed stuff for it. What do you wish more hunters would do, more regular outdoorsmen would do in order to help maintain the spread?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that having options for folks, because I think a lot of hunters really do want to, have healthy animals and do the right thing. And I think one of the things that just a few good practices, like not adding in a lot of bait and lures where we're attracting a lot of animals together, definitely helps. We don't want to be sort of putting fuel on the fire, right? Like if there is an infectious animal in your herd, you don't know which one that is. And if they're all coming to the same bait pile, there's a chance that they could be directly, infecting other animals. So, I think it's encouraging when folks are, using the skills that we have as hunters and as recreationists to let's track those deer. Let's look at the best paths. Let's put our stand up by an area where we know there's just some really good natural movement and such. the use of bait and feed and such, we don't always need it. I think that we got to rely on our skills too. And that's part of the excitement of the process, right? Like part of the hunt.
Okay. So my question becomes, because Kansas did consider making, baiting illegal, which is where I'm from. But food plot's not illegal. And so my question is like, how big does a food source need to be to help? Not, you know what I mean? I mean, I can put in a 1/2 acre food plot and it's going to do the same thing. It's going to get deer right in front of me, but they're still congregating in a really small area.
That's a really good one. Michigan's been battling the bait discussion quite a lot as well. And actually, a really great master's student who came out of Michigan State, out of our department. I was on her committee. Her name's Samantha Courtney. She did a research project for her master's degree on sort of looking at how many more like risky interactions really were happening over bait versus food plots versus just kind of natural land cover. And she had set up bait piles for research and had trail cameras that were positioned in multiple angles around the bait pile, and then also did the same thing for food plots, and then also kind of had like a control study of just a natural landscape. She measured a whole lot of things. She measured those video interactions, the behaviors at those spots, who was doing the behavior. She also did like systematic collection of soil and fecal deposition. So like how much were they pooping where they were eating and in one spot, right? And CWD, infectious prions, right, can stay infectious in fecal matter. So that's why that's a risk factor also. And she did a great study and found that it was statistically different at bait piles compared to food plots and the sort of control, more diffuse landscape, how many risky direct contacts were happening over those bait piles. So that was measurably documented. This is published in the Journal of Wildlife Management. And food plots were just a lot more diffuse. So, deer are coming in and they're probably using them within their normal home range and as a really nice spot to come by those crepuscular hours, but they're not congregating around a point source in the same very concentrated way. And they also don't feel the need then to defend and sort of be aggressive and territorial of that point source. So we saw around the bait piles, there was a lot more direct, rearing up, kicking, just a lot more aggression, big old does kicking out yearling males and stuff, and just a lot of interactions going on that you just really weren't forcing at a more diffuse food plot that was kind of, there was enough for everybody. Deer could kind of have their space. But again, significant differences between food plots and bait sites in particular. So plant some sorghum, plant some, alfalfa, whatever. There's all sorts of, great literature out there on nice food plots based on where you live and what you're going for, that can really make an attractive site. But it's not that point source where every animal and every non-deer or elk or whatever is coming up on it too, raccoons or all sorts of other things. So,
and you can tell me if this has been bad advice that I have tried to give. From a hunting standpoint, I think it's good advice, but from a CWD, you can tell me. I have often said, like, even if you are going to use a bait, let's just take corn. That's the easiest. If you are going to use corn, spread it way out. Like, don't make a pile. First off, deer like to forage. They like to move around while they're eating. But secondly, and I've always said, so it's more natural for the deer rather than standing at a pile and just munching down as much as they can. But secondly, and I thought in my mind, I'm like, well, then I'm not congregating them in one spot. I mean, if it's spread out over this big field, is there any truth to that? Like, rather than piling it up, like if you are going to use bait, fan it way out and spread it way out. That way, like you said, they're not congregating on one point.
Yeah, honestly, like, I think, that makes a lot of sense. Like, corn is kind of like, candy for them. They love it. It's not part of their natural diet, but if it's going to help attract things for a little bit of time for that window of hunting, and you can fan it out quite a lot, that's certainly less risky compared to dumping a whole bunch in one spot where they're all, pawing at that and fighting over it and drooling all over it and everything else. So absolutely, like dispersing is great. You don't want animals having a lot of direct contact with each other, or again, all defecating and drooling or whatever in the same spot. That's just going to be a hot spot for those infectious prions if any of those animals actually are CWD positive.
So I do want to get to Justin's kind of talking points on the management aspect of it. But again, as far as the hunter that is going out and what they can do to help control this, would not water tanks be even worse?
I think, again, anytime you're bringing animals in together, it's not great. I don't think it's necessarily worse than a bait pile. I think, it's a resource that animals are using, and they're using it in a very close proximity. The saliva might get a little more diffuse in water, but certainly it can spread still. So I wouldn't say any worse than a bait pile necessarily, but yeah, we're bringing animals together. Same though with some lures and other things. Folks use all sorts of stuff to kind of attract animals, mineral blocks, licks, all that. So when you get a lot of animals at one spot, that's going to be tricky. Even sometimes, farmers who have spillage from grain and silos and stuff, just cleaning up the grain or dispersing it out more, just so not everything's piled up on top of each other and they're not, right up in each other's faces or feeling they have to defend that.
Okay. And that makes sense. On the water, I guess, the more you talked about saliva, I just started picturing, I'm like, well, all these deer, going right into the water and it has to be more saliva spread than a bait pile. But would you say that as far as hunters go, of those single focal points, be it water, be it bait site, be it mineral licks, whatever it might be, would you say that's the single biggest thing that if hunters could stop doing that, it would make the biggest difference?
It certainly would make a big difference. Again, all of these things, I wish there was one silver bullet. I wish there was one thing we could stop, because we'd be all in and working on that. But it's a lot of things. So that, making sure that if you go hunting in a really CWD hotspot, you are taking home clean meat or deboned meat, and you're not bringing in an infectious carcass and then throw it in the backyard or something. Because, even if you bury it a little bit, coyotes might pull it apart or something else. And then you've got this infectious carcass and maybe gut pile that's getting spread around as well. So that's another thing. Just checking on your deer, I think knowing if it's positive can be helpful to make some of those decisions with. So yeah, moving deer around is one thing that we see where CWD might pop up in new places that are far outside of the migratory pattern or dispersal distance of a deer or elk or something like that. So humans are definitely part of those spread factors. But yeah, if we can keep them not all piled up on each other at one spot, that's certainly a big piece of the puzzle.
Gotcha. And I'm really excited to get to kind of the debunking of the big myths or wading through all the just crap you hear about CWD. But Justin, at ATA, I know you talked pretty in depth about kind of your I don't want to say worries, your concerns with the current management process as far as a long-term solution. So you kind of want to walk through that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big thing that we're hearing from hunters, in our world is that we have these studies that show okay, long-term infection of CWD potentially can reduce age class and at the same time reduce population density. Hunters are seeing these efforts to reduce population and everything is basically the same outcome. And so do we have a situation, and I know it's hard because you don't do anything. I mean, you can't have a control, right? You can't say, okay, we did this super heavy eradication move here, and at the same time, we didn't do anything. And what's the difference? Or do we? Is there anything out there that we can point to and say, yes, the worst case scenario of a high infection is this, but if we come in early and do it, and reduce populations, this is what we've seen, to where that's the preferable, I guess, method at this point versus letting it just kind of run its course and seeing the long-term effect.
So it's a tricky one. It's genuinely a hard one to answer because we haven't always done a great job at assessing all of the management that's gone into CWD in a really rigorous, standardized way across every state. So a lot of times as deer biologists, we're even counting deer differently state to state, or counting elk differently, a little different state to state. We're measuring CWD prevalence maybe a little different state to state, or looking for it a little differently. So one of the first things I want to say is, in the wildlife community, I think we're making a lot of effort towards trying to standardize and assess what we're doing better. That's on us. We got to do better there. I also think that if you just let it run its course, we know what's going to happen. It's going to be kind of like, Wyoming sort of let it run its course for quite a while, and it's pretty high prevalence in a lot of places in Wyoming. So, there is certainly places where folks didn't know it was even on the landscape until all of a sudden they looked, and then it was like a raging fire when they wouldn't have expected it yet. So again, those are the places where you let it run its course. It's going to get high prevalence. You're going to see reductions in your deer population, reductions in that population growth rate, and reductions in your age structure to be younger animals, because older animals are going to be knocking over from CWD. And having deer actually die from CWD has been shown time and time again. And this is a funny thing that's like, you talk to folks and they're like, oh, they're not really dying from CWD. I'm like, let us show you the slideshow of all these dead deer that died untouched from a predator or a car or anything else, and super clinical, just totally wasted away. The only pathogen in that deer system that could have been a mortality was the chronic wasting disease, prions that were infectious. So Arkansas has shown that, Colorado, Wyoming, Wisconsin have shown just a whole lot of actual mortality associated with that disease. If you let it go, it will kill deer. Done. That is absolutely the case. And I'm always encouraging folks to go look at the data, go talk to the researchers, go out to those study areas. You'll see it. The dead pictures of deer and how they died, and the necropsy table and all of that with all these great pathologists. There's a lot of information there. Nobody's trying to hide it. It's there. It's absolutely a smoking gun in terms of a cause of death in a lot of cases for those really hot places. So again, if you can get lucky and detect it really early, but kind of needle in a haystack when you've got a lot of deer on the landscape, especially when we're thinking eastern United States and whitetail deer populations that are pretty highly abundant in some places. If you can get in and get it out and, put all you can at it early on, I do think that you have a chance at maybe getting lucky and either getting out those early infections or keeping that prevalence really low for a long time where it's not going to affect your herd. And then there's been good studies out of USGS and different state agencies looking at how hunter harvest has helped maintain low prevalence for a long time. So that hunter harvest is really important too. Just, keeping the gas on of deer populations so that it doesn't get too high and you don't allow for more disease transmission just because you have such high deer densities and a lot more direct contact. Hunter harvest is a really critical part. So just keeping those deer populations at a good population level and keeping the pressure on is really helpful to keep prevalence down in general.
No, I think that answers it. Hopefully this is a little better with my camera off. But like I said, that's what we're hearing. And I appreciate you, kind of addressing that, because, at the end of the day, people are like, well, it's going to be the same thing. Why are we killing all these deer and reducing opportunities? So I have told Dylan this and other people, I think we could definitely raise some funds if we had a bunch of pictures of deer with CWD and Sarah McLaughlin playing in the background. The organization needs to put that out there and use that to raise some funds, help the deer.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's another part of the picture. We're not even talking about non-hunters here. And managers are managing the public trust of natural resources and deer in particular, and it's for everybody, right? So hunters are dealing with this a lot directly, but there's some truth to what you're saying, because I think people, they don't want to think that the deer population out their back door is sick and, wasting away.
So how early in a deer's life will it start showing the effects of CWD?
In a deer's life, so young deer can become infected and die from CWD. It sort of depends on how hot the disease is in a certain area. So if you have a lot of infection all around and, the doe has CWD and every, animal that new fawn is interacting with has CWD, they can get it pretty young. But even then, it'll take months potentially for that animal to actually succumb to the disease. In a lot of places, let's say you have some deer infected in the area and typical infection might not actually look clinical, or like where you can tell a deer is really sick, for maybe 12 months. And in that time, that deer is actively shedding these infectious prions and making other animals infected. That is one of the hardest things about this disease system. It is so slow. So you look at a deer, it looks pretty healthy. But if you look close, it might kind of look despondent. It might not really be, super vigilant, or just like what we'd expect for a deer. And then, 6 months, 12 months later, that deer is actually looking really rough and, bad condition, low ears, drooling, very malnourished. They aren't eating. So that's when a deer really looks sick. But it can take so long to get there and then it's just, going to quietly go die. Whereas I'm sure if you guys have heard of a disease called epizootic hemorrhagic disease, maybe also called blue tongue in some places. That's a slightly different disease in the same system. But those EHD mortalities happen, bam, end of summer, kind of a dry time of year. You'll get a lot of dead deer at one time. They die very quickly within, maybe 8 days or so of being infected by a virus. And it's dramatic. Hunters will see a bunch of dead deer at once, right? That's EHD, sure. CWD, slow. Don't pick up on it quickly. Kind of a quiet death, right? And again, a lot of harvested animals look fine until they're tested.
So I am, and you've already mentioned kind of the one big misconceptions that people don't actually believe deer are dying from CWD. What would you say, like, just wading through all of the crap that you hear about CWD, what would you say are some of the biggest things that you wish people would truly understand about CWD?
Gosh, I think, just knowing that it really is a really nasty disease that nobody in the wildlife community has any interest in having around. Like, we all love wildlife. The folks who are doing this work love wildlife, hunt wildlife too, enjoy wildlife. Nobody wants this disease around. There's no exciting conspiracy theory behind it. That would make, if that was the case, maybe, it wasn't a thing. That'd be great. But unfortunately, it is really nasty. And it's just some of the basic disease concepts, like when you're closer together with someone or something that has a nasty disease, you're more likely to pick it up, right? That's a thing. Knowing that this does kill animals, it really causes death eventually. Now it might, maybe they get picked off some other way in the meantime, but certainly if you love them, leave them alone long enough, they'll die from this particular disease. Knowing that humans have a role in this, and, again, baiting and such, like when we're bringing animals together where they wouldn't naturally be interacting with each other at that high of density, that's going to just make more chances for disease contact and disease, pathogen transmission. Gosh, what else? What are the other myths that you guys are hearing?
What do you say to all the folks, and Justin might be able to, because I've heard him address this. What do you say to the folks who are like, quit killing the deer? Like, you don't have to come in and mass kill my deer. Like, what do you say to those folks?
Yeah, it sucks. Like, it's terrible. It's not what we want to do or what anybody wants to do. But, if you have a whole lot of something and they're all interacting with each other, if we can sort of reduce the prevalence and reduce the density of those animals interacting with each other, and you can have fewer deer, but they're healthy, and then you give them a chance to rebound with animals that aren't infected, then that's a better outcome. Now that takes time. And again, you're seeing some action that isn't very fun in the short term for sure. Now, again, with that said, state agencies really have to make those decisions based on the stakeholders and the folks that they're working with. And it's a decision that is really context dependent, depending on the prevalence and what they're dealing with there. And if that's the right decision for that state agency to pursue, or if a state agency feels they can sort of keep densities low and keep, contact rates low with other measures like keeping harvest pressure on, making sure that doe harvest is still coming along, making sure deer densities don't get too high, making sure that, maybe some preventative actions are going on, like not feeding or congregating deer too much, restricting movement into the state from places that are infectious that would maybe be a source of new disease. So there's other things. There's a handful of things that state agencies are often trying to do. And it's a tough job. It's a tall order as a state agency. They're trying to, keep hunters on the landscape. We all know the numbers of hunters declining year to year. And certainly nobody's wanting to push that away. We want to incorporate and encourage hunting of these awesome animals. At the same time, we want healthy populations for the long term, not just the next 3 years, right? So it's an absolute balancing act. And I certainly, I sit at a university now, I'm not a state agency, so I get to research these things and try to provide some more tools or shed some more light on it. But it's a tough one.
Obviously, a lot of stuff coming out of Oklahoma with this proposed
Yep.
deer that they say are the answer. My understanding is that deer are not as symptomatic as quickly. So in essence, they're wanting to put a super spreader on the landscape. If the deer is not if they get CWD and then wander around for a longer period of time, isn't that the exact opposite of what we're trying to do with controlling it?
Yes. The short answer is yes. So I think sometimes when there seems to be something that is too good to be true, it probably is, unfortunately. So having these deer that are coming from farm cervids, right, that are highly manipulated and looked at and lots of care goes into, farming cervids and a lot of information about their genetics and all these things. There has been some correlation, I'd say, with some of those traits and such for those animals that have been bred with that in mind, and like a lower uptake of becoming CWD infectious, right? It just slows it down. And there's a lot of things that are individual to an animal, its own anatomy, physiology that make it a little unique, that are unique to maybe the strain of the prion and a variety of other factors that kind of create for some of those situations. That's great. And maybe in farm cervids where things can be tightly controlled, maybe and animals are generally harvested, maybe it's a high fence operation or something, fairly young and in good condition. Maybe you can contain things and that helps a bit. For free ranging animals, oh my gosh, right? Like this is assuming you're breeding a whole bunch of animals in the farm cervid industry to then put out on the landscape that again, then are spreading potentially infectious prions around more. So that's one part. And then even if you have, let's say you get, that perfect deer that doesn't really get CWD very quickly or at all, even for a long time, that deer better not die from anything else. And it better breed like no other deer's bred before. So how do you ensure that those alleles or those traits associated with not getting infected as quickly go into a whole deer population without any other unintended consequences where they're still resilient to everything else in the environment that's going to hit them, basically. So that's the challenging part. I mean, wanting to introduce, deer or, other cervids in free range populations for big antlers or other things that, humans have found desirable is not new. But the logistics of that and the economics of it and the biology of how deer breed and interact and how many deer would have to be placed out there is just completely unrealistic.
I've got a really stupid question, and I'm excited to see your response.
Okay.
Why can't we just develop a cure for it?
I would love that. There's been studies on vaccines or, a treatment, I would say. None of them have been published where they've demonstrated a lot of success. But that work is actually, people are absolutely investigating that. I haven't seen anything where it's like, yes, this is our answer. There's been a lot of studies, though, that have helped us hone in on better diagnostics, better understanding of contamination or decontamination methods. Like bleach works. If you are cleaning your hunting knives with like a partial bleach solution, there's some really good information out there that shows that bleach can actually break down. And you don't need like 80%. It's like, I think, gosh, I need to check the source again. Folks at University of Minnesota have done a lot of research on this, like 10%, 15% bleach, something like that. We had a paper that I helped out with a bit on some of that as well. Cleaning up your gear, like cleaning off the bottoms of your boots, those things help. And there's more information on this all the time that helps us have more tools in our toolbox, at least.
So, Justin, I think I've kind of covered all of my basic thought process questions. Do you have any other higher level, kind of deeper questions?
Yeah, I think we can kind of close out on this. There was some funding that was dedicated through Congress for CWD research, monitoring, all those things. That's given us the ability to do a lot of this stuff. What else, what's the next thing that we need folks researching? What should researchers be trying to formulate a hypothesis around to go for this funding to really help us out? I think the money's gone to some great things like you mentioned, but is there other things we should be looking at? Should we be looking for more funding? What do we need to do for next steps? Because from where we're sitting, it's spreading. It's showing up all over the place. Now, is it because we're looking? Well, maybe, but at the same time, I would argue at this point, we have not found the gold or the silver bullet, right? So what is that bullet? What do we need to be researching to get us to that level?
Yeah, I that's a really good question. And I don't think it's just one thing. Regardless of the topic area within the CWD research realm, one of the biggest things that would help would be to have long-term funding and political support, because it's really hard as a manager or wildlife biologist to do some of these research projects. And then, people get frustrated and the funding gets pulled 2 years later. A deer population doesn't turn over in 2 years. We can't really see what's going on unless we have some sustained investment, and that, making sure that those dollars are spent well is absolutely important, but having it sustained so that we're investing in good science and seeing the whole picture here. There's been a handful of studies that have done that. The Arkansas project was really great. There's been some great research in Wisconsin, Colorado, Wyoming more recently. That's improving, but we need to understand those population level effects, how on the ground, if we do some of these management practices, does it really change CWD prevalence? That's really hard to actually pull off and get the support to try it out in a real place and not just in a computer model, So some of those things, the adaptive management support would be really great, because again, if we are assessing our ability to do wildlife management and reduce CWD, and we're assessing it in standardized ways, in an adaptive way over a good chunk of time, we can really learn from that and sort of tweak and improve our tools. But if that's not supported, and folks are just kind of reacting to year funding, 1 year pots of funds and competitive grants, it's really hard to really build that depth of research and program and long-term understanding. I think there's other really good stuff going on around some of these new tools and diagnostic approaches that can maybe pick up on things early. Also, just trying to get, there's always an interest in having a carcass side test or something that's like a live animal test that's more robust that we can rely on. So animals aren't getting moved around in different settings, maybe in captive or farm settings, without knowing definitively that they're CWD free. And that, animals, you harvest an animal right then and there, you can maybe figure out the likelihood it might have CWD, but we're not there yet. The science, as much as I would love it to be there, it's not there yet. And so there's a lot of those types of things that would really help. Again, sustained support and using good science for our management decisions is key. We can't lose those. We don't want to lose trust in those institutions because they're really critical. And once they're gone, they're gone. So, and we want to keep these populations around for a long time too.
So to wrap up, 2 questions. How do you wish hunters would communicate about CWD? And secondly, where should people go? I know there's a lot of places people can go. Where should people go to get the most recent, up-to-date, good information about CWD?
Those are great questions. So I would say communicating about CWD, I think just knowing that it's not a conspiracy, it's not a thing, like nobody's out to get you on this one. Like we all don't like it. And just saying, yeah, this is a thing. Just like other causes of death for deer are a thing. Let's just be like, okay, this stinks. What can we do to help? Or let's just try to, do a few measures that you can influence to keep deer healthy in your area, keep hunting for sure, keep those deer populations at levels that aren't super high. So take a doe, keep those populations balanced, and engage with those state wildlife agencies. They're there. They want to talk to you. They want to work with you. So making them the enemy won't help anything. So engaging more with them is a good thing. And yeah, just talking to, buddies, like speaking up when you're at deer camp or whatever and saying, yeah, that CWD is nasty. Let's do these little tiny things that might help with that. And hey, I'm a good hunter. I'm good at tracking deer. Let's get into our tracking skills and make a food plot or something. Let's not worry about that 5-gallon bucket of corn right now. So there's other things that you can enjoy about deer hunting that might actually help be mitigating CWD. For the last part, where can they go? CWD Alliance. We have a CWD Research Consortium. Those are all great sources. There's a few different sites and links that I can send you. But again, if you go to CWD Alliance or CWD Research Consortium, USGS has a lot of good information. Most state fish and wildlife agencies have great information on their web pages about CWD as well. And again, universities, extension, also great sources. So there's a lot of good information out there. And just, whenever we're inundated with websites and social media and stuff, just putting on your hat of thinking does this make sense? Let me go back to the real information here and just having a bit of a filter for some of the stuff we see online and just being reasonable and thinking yeah, this is how diseases work, unfortunately. And, I'm not going to throw out all science here just because this one is not a very fun one to deal with. But yeah, just kind of keeping that filter in mind and speaking up, and being brave enough, even if it's online and social media stuff, to say, hey, this isn't legit. Here's a good website of good information, and, just trying to keep that going.
Oh, Sonja, I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the comments on this one, Dylan. And I, see what comes up on, the questions that people have. Maybe sometime in the future we can kind of, sort through those and sit down with you again, Sonja. Really appreciate you on. And this is all good stuff. And, to reiterate that point, we're all hunters. We all love wildlife. We're not out there trying to find an excuse to not hunt or not have this for our kids. That's an absolutely ridiculous claim. And the reason that I get a little fired up when I see this misinformation out there, have these conversations. Like you said, this is how we get it to a good spot and really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the invite. I'm here anytime. And if you want to do a deeper dive, absolutely. I also have a lot of awesome colleagues who we're all kind of tackling different little, slices of this research pie for CWD. Like I specialize on deer density and modeling and, some of this. I'm about to jump on the phone with Mark Reuter, director of SCWDS, who did a lot of work with the Arkansas project and has a ton of work on the diagnostics and pathology of CWD. And Colin Gillen is a wildlife veterinarian in Oregon, also both of those guys that I work with a lot on a lot of projects. And they're also both Boone and Crockett professional members like I am. And, we all love the resource. So, those folks, I'll throw them in the ring too. I'd be happy to pull in a few other good colleagues who could be other experts on this.
Awesome. Let me tell you something. When I go on vacation with the family, I hardly ever get a hotel. I want a full house. I want a kitchen. I want a big old bathroom. I want room for the kids to run around and play. I want to be comfortable. I want to be able to make my own meals. So I hardly ever get a hotel. I'm always looking for a house to stay in. And the same has spilled over into a hunt. If I'm headed on a hunt, the last thing I want to do is be carrying a bow and be carrying coolers and ice chests through the lobby of a hotel with blood dripping out of the cooler and everybody getting mad at you. Nobody wants that. So find you a place to stay on the new Hunt B&B. Full houses, comfortable houses, all the room you need with a back porch you can sit on and drink some coffee. These properties are well placed next to incredible hunting opportunities. So it's not only a great tool if you know that you're going to a certain public piece of ground and you're going to hunt on it, you can look for a property close to that. This is also a great resource to find new pieces of public ground to hunt on. Go on there and look at all the cabins. And when you look at the listing, it'll say positioned right next to the Call County public ground access hunting. And there's good hunting nearby. Guys, you have to go check out Hunt B&B as you're planning your next hunt to find you a place to stay. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening. Have a fantastic week. Good luck this spring and early fall as we get into more hunting
Turkey
seasons.
season's coming up. Yep.
It is. And spring bear, which is always, that's one of my favorite times. So guys, good luck out there this spring. And as always, make sure and keep the dusty side up.